You're looking for a vacuum sealer that actually makes life easier, not just a gadget that sounds impressive on paper. You want something you can set up once and trust to do the job every time, without having to wrestle with confusing controls or worry that it'll break after a few weeks. And you'd rather spend your money on a tool that actually saves you time and food waste, instead of a device that's all hype and no real payoff. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The first thing that makes people hesitate with any chamber vacuum sealer is the size and the price. A chamber unit isn't the little countertop pack you can stash in a cabinet, it's a full-size box that sits on a countertop or a workbench, and it usually costs more than a standard external sealer. That upfront investment can feel risky, especially if you've never used a chamber before. The biggest fear is ending up with a machine that's either too complicated to use daily or one that takes up more space than you have room for. Those are real concerns, and they're why I dug into what actual owners are saying and looked at the practical trade-offs before hitting record. Let's start with the basics of how a chamber vacuum sealer works, because that explains a lot about who will benefit most. Instead of pulling the air out of the bag from the outside, a chamber sealer removes the air from the entire chamber first, then activates the sealing bar while the pressure is still low. The result is a seal that's airtight even when you have liquids inside the bag. That's a game changer for anyone who wants to seal soups, marinades, or juices without the bag bursting, something a regular external sealer can't handle reliably. If you're a home cook who spends a lot of time on meal prep, especially with the rise of sous-vide cooking, the ability to seal liquids cleanly is huge. Imagine you're making a batch of homemade chicken broth. With an external sealer you'd have to cool the broth, spoon it into a bag, and then carefully seal it to avoid leaks, a real hassle. With a chamber unit like the VacMaster VP112S, you can pour the hot broth straight into a vacuum-grade bag, close the top, drop the bag into the chamber, and the machine does the rest. The seal stays intact through the sous-vide bath, so you get perfectly flavored meat without any waterlogged bags. Another practical scenario is bulk meat storage. If you buy a large cut of steak or a whole turkey, you'll want to portion it out and freeze it for future meals. The chamber sealer can handle multiple bags at once, which means you can seal 3 or 4 portions in a single cycle. That cuts down on the number of runs you need to do and speeds up the overall prep time. The rating of 4.6 out of 5 stars from over 300 reviewers suggests that most users find the device lives up to those expectations for consistency. Now, let's talk about the downsides you'll actually notice in a kitchen. First, the footprint. The VP112S is a tabletop unit, roughly the size of a small microwave, and it needs a dedicated spot on your counter or a sturdy table. If you're cooking in a cramped apartment kitchen, finding that space can be a challenge. Second, the price point is higher than most entry-level sealers. You're paying for the chamber technology and the reliability that comes with it, but that cost can be a barrier for casual users who only seal once a week. There's also a learning curve, even though the controls are fairly straightforward. The first few cycles feel a bit like a science experiment. You have to set the vacuum time and the sealing time, and you might need to tweak those numbers depending on the thickness of the bag you're using. Once you get the hang of it, the process becomes almost automatic, but the initial adjustment can be a bit frustrating if you're expecting a plug-and-play experience. Noise is another practical factor. The vacuum pump in a chamber sealer is louder than the small pumps you find in external units. In a busy kitchen, that hum can be noticeable, especially if you're sealing multiple bags back-to-back. It's not a deal-breaker for most, but if you're sensitive to background noise, it's worth keeping in mind. What about consumables? The VP112S uses standard vacuum-grade polybags that you can buy in bulk. Those bags are relatively inexpensive, but you do need to keep a supply on hand. Some users have mentioned that the seal bar can leave a faint imprint on the bag, which is normal for chamber sealers but can be a visual downside if you're storing items you want to look perfect for presentation. So, who should hit the buy button for this machine? If you're serious about sous-vide cooking, regularly freeze large quantities of meat, or often need to seal liquids, think sauces, marinades, or even homemade stock. This is a tool that will pay for itself in saved food.